public and private sector, representing the whole scope of the innovative and creative space. And I'm very pleased that to start us off, we have as our initiator, India's own Minister of Commerce and Industry, Shri Suresh Prabhu. The Minister, please welcome him up, please.
So good afternoon, friends. I'm very glad that such a large number of people from different parts of the world, from different backgrounds, different ideas are all here, and we are all going to engage into a dialogue, which is the only way we can solve so many problems that we are facing in the world today. And this is at a time when in real sense of the term, the disruptions are caused by several reasons. But one of the key disruptions which is all pervasive, affecting almost all human life and going to affect more as we go along, is something which is caused by technology, and which is something which is going to be driven by innovation, and something which should result into, as the topic today, on something creative. And the idea that it's going to be innovative, but also to be creative. Is it possible that we can actually make it a difference between disruption caused by innovation and creativity? Probably there is a chance of a dialogue on the real sense on the ground, in which innovation in any geography can be creative in all other parts. And to make that happen, we would need partnerships, we need coalitions, and that's what I am supposed to be doing as a Minister of Commerce and Industry in India, when we are in the process of creating a new trade policy in which we are thinking about how do you live in this knowledge economy by ensuring that all the good part of the world benefits from these policies. India is working on a big way on digital economy. Our Prime Minister has started a very big program called Digital India, and this program largely is covering almost all facets of socio-economic life of the people. We are working on a very important ambition, and which will be in the realm of reality, is making a $5 trillion economy in the course of next few years. And this is something which will happen inevitably, because when we grow at 7 to 8% now, and hopefully in the next few years, even at a higher rate, we'll be reaching there sooner than later. And when that happens, the good component of that must come from the knowledge that must come from digital platforms, and that's what we're working on. I'm very happy to say that we are already drawing up strategies of how do you get 20% of our GDP from manufacturing, which will be almost $1 trillion. In this $1 trillion will be again driven by innovation. Something which is not even those industries which are not even born today are the industries which will be actually driving the future growth. So we are identifying 6 or 7 very emerging industries which will be created by innovation and which will work as partners with others. Services, which is India's mainstay of India's economy, almost 2/3, and we are sure at least because the manufacturing will rise more than what it is today, even in percentage terms as well as in absolute numbers, the services would be something like $3 trillion. Again, most of these services will be, some way or the other, will be affected by innovation and will be delivered, many of those, through digital platforms. In agriculture, wherein a target is to double farmers' income in the next 5 years' time, which is what Prime Minister is working on, and that again will have a huge component, huge infusion of technology and primarily from digital platforms. And each of these, we are trying to invite innovators to work with us. We are now 20,000 startups in India, which will be doubled in the next few years' time. And we are trying to actually encourage these startups, which in a way, many of them come out with innovative ideas, and those innovations, how can we take it to creation? And this innovation to creation journey is something which will actually give us chance of having partnership with several countries. So our entire trade policy that we are thinking about for future is based on partnerships. In any case, I keep telling people that nowadays there's a growing protectionism in the world. People are saying we must trade, but with a limited way. And therefore, every country preferably wants that we should export, but not import anything. But I'm worried that all countries in the world decide that we'll only export and not import at all. Then what will happen? It could be a good innovation, but may not result into any creation. But therefore, how do you work in a way that we can have a partnership which will actually result into getting better at it? So all these startups in India are the ones which will be driving innovation, and we are trying to work with them. And in that, we see a huge potential of working with several countries in the world. As it is, we are seeing the manufacturing and the shape of manufacturing, the type of manufacturing has changed the world already. Nobody makes end-to-end products in one place. We do something in one place, something in other places. So therefore, already there's a partnership which is really possible. And therefore, we are working on possibilities of doing that more by having more partnership. I'm very happy that I can see so many business leaders. A very distinguished diplomat and ambassador of US is here. We like to work together in a way that this will result into creating a better world by using innovation as a trigger for bringing about a change. And that is what, there is a huge possibility. We already identified some sectors in which we will feel that there is going to be a tremendous, huge exponential growth in the years to come. And most of them will be really driven by innovation. As it is, we are seeing a huge obsolescence of technology that is happening at a pace which is so rapid that it is mind-boggling to even think about it. And therefore, making this partnership will make a small time that is available for innovation to be a commercial reality, to reap benefit of that commercial reality, to amortize the cost on it. Therefore, having this partnership will actually help us to really benefit from it. And that's what we are trying to do. I'm very happy that we are meeting at a time when we are making sure that most of our industry, we are trying to modernize them. We are trying to, as I said, at least 6 different type of sectors in which we'll be focusing. Those are sectors, those are industries which are not even born today, but will be born and will be driving the future. So we are working on them, some of them in life sciences, some of them in energy, some of them in materials, some of them in areas like environmental management and others. So these are the sectors in which we are going to focus for future growth, future driving growth, and therefore we really look forward to that partnership. So I will stop here so that we can work and answer some of your questions. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Minister Prabhu. You know, it seems to me that if you and Prime Minister Modi are successful in really energizing the latent innovative capacity of India's domestic economy, that there is no reason that India shouldn't play the role in the global economy that the United States did after World War II, that China did over the last 20 years of being the global engine of growth for the world. and it's a weighty responsibility, but I think that's where we're headed. To talk about what it takes to awaken innovation and creativity in any economy, we really have an outstanding panel that ORF has organized. We're joined by United States Ambassador to India, Kenneth Juster, who most recently served in the White House as really holding down two of the most senior and influential roles in the executive office of the president, serving on both the national security staff and the National Economic Council. A really rich and diverse career in the private and public sector. I'll mention two things. Most recently, he was with the global investment firm Warburg Pincus, and before that, Executive Vice President of Salesforce.com. So clearly no stranger to both the public and private sector aspects of creating an innovation economy. We're also joined by Esther Dichu from UPS. She's the Vice President of Public Affairs for the Indian subcontinent, Middle East, and Africa. 14 years with UPS. I say nobody ever leaves because they bleed brown there, but an expert in logistics, but more than that in the innovation of logistics and how logistics creates solutions for things like access to medicines, access to food. So very important contribution there. Saad Mohseni joins us, Chairman and CEO of the Mobi Group, a media conglomerate that began in Afghanistan but now serves countries throughout South Central Asia and the Middle East, and a real expert on creativity and the contribution of creative content and its distribution to the vitality not only of an economy but of a society. And finally, Kavita Gupta, who is founding managing partner of Consensus Capital, an investment firm focused on investing in blockchain applications. So we have a panel that takes us from the government institutions that underpin the knowledge economy, then to the tangible goods economy, the ideas economy, and finally the technological innovations that are securing and facilitating the whole thing. So really a tremendous group here, and I want to thank ORF for making this possible. To help us, to build on Minister Prabhu's remarks and help us set the ground level, I'd now like to invite Ambassador Juster to begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. It's nice to be here. I've got only a short amount of time, and I thought I'd touch briefly on three issues. First, what I see as some of the key catalysts for the innovation economy in the United States. Second, how innovation can affect geo-economics. And third, some of the challenges that this set of issues presents to us. First, in terms of what I see as the enabling environment for innovation in the United States, I would highlight four factors. First, our education system, an education system that teaches people how to think creatively. It trains students to be able to solve problems, to take new information and figure out how to process it in a creative and analytical fashion. Second key factor that you see in technology hubs such as Silicon Valley is a culture of not only risk-taking, but a culture that accepts failure. It's very important that people be free to try new ideas, to fail, and not to be punished for doing so. And you'll see this throughout Silicon Valley. You'll see people who will work in 5 jobs in 10 years. They've been at a startup for a year or two. It hasn't gone well. They go to another startup, and maybe only on their 5th try they hit a startup that really has potential for the future. And if they present their resume of having gone to 5 places in 10 years, that'll be viewed very favorably in Silicon Valley. If you did that on the East Coast, which is a bit more traditional in its approach, and you had 5 jobs in 10 years, you wouldn't get a job interview. So it's a very different type of culture that you see in a technology hub. A third factor that I think is very critical in the United States relates to capital markets and our ability to disperse capital quickly at all levels to entrepreneurs and people who have ideas. In the United States, we have an ecosystem from angel investors, the very small investments at a very early stage of an idea to venture capitalists, to private equity, to institutional investors. I think this is part of what makes America unique in the ability for entrepreneurs to obtain funding for their ideas. And what goes hand in hand with this is a risk-reward system that rewards people who do invest, especially those who invest very early, if they are successful, because a lot of times you'll invest and it won't be successful and you lose your money, and so when you finally invest in a successful startup, you need to be able to be rewarded for that. And that really takes me to the final ingredient I want to highlight for an innovation economy, and that is the need to protect intellectual property. For those people who invest their time, energy, money, and effort in an innovative idea, they will fail a lot of times before ever, if they ever succeed. We always read about the great successes, but there are a lot of people who have tried and are serial entrepreneurs, but don't ever turn out to be that successful. But if you do succeed, you need the certainty to know that your ideas will be protected for enough time to earn back what you invested and more, to be rewarded for the risk you took and for the many times you did not succeed overall. So, in my view, a successful economy for innovation has to have a good education system, a culture that accepts failure and rewards risk-taking, a capital market system that can fund it, and the protection of intellectual property. Now, the second set of issues I want to quickly touch on is the impact that innovation can have on geo-economics. I see geo-economics as the use of economic tools to advance geopolitical positions. And while, as was mentioned, a country should try to anticipate areas of research that are important to future economic growth, whether it be how to analyze big data, genomics, other areas, artificial intelligence, robotics, I think we have to all recognize that innovation and its impact is always a bit unpredictable. You really can't scope it out in advance, and you have to let people try and fail in a whole series of different directions. And it also depends how you use innovation. Innovation itself is neutral, but the key is what you do with it. And let me give three quick examples. One relates to the energy sector and its impact on geo-economics and geopolitics. For many years, petroleum resources have been a potent tool in international affairs, and countries with extensive petroleum resources have been able to use that as leverage to achieve some of their objectives in the policy world. And the United States was thought to have a depleting supply of oil, and therefore was vulnerable to leverage from other countries, the OPEC countries and others that had great access to oil. But then through the use of really what was an old technology, but in a new way, what was hydraulic fracturing, or something known as fracking, the U.S. Energy sector has been able to extract enormous amounts of oil and gas from shale rock, to the point that the United States now is, I think, much closer to complete energy security, and also able to export oil and gas in a way that can strategically help partners and allies of us. So this is a case where a nation state was able to use innovation in a very positive way from its own point of view to achieve its objectives. A second example is the innovation of smartphones and social media. Social media really enables organizations and even individuals to incite activities such as an economic boycott that can affect a company, a city, or a country. And so here's an instance of an innovation in which non-governmental organizations or even individuals were able to use an innovative tool, smartphones and social media, to change the geo-economic equation for a city's operations. They can change a city's policies and practices by swelling up a crowd to take economic activity against them. My third example is where innovative technology can be used in a very negative way, and that's the innovations that allow again, individuals, perhaps even terrorists, to do cyber attacks in which you could take down a business, a financial network, a city, or a country with a cyber attack. So this is an innovation that has very negative implications. The point, again, is that innovations are neutral. It's how you use them and how they're applied that matters. And therefore, to conclude, I would just throw out some of the challenges or implications of all of this. Again, I come back to our education systems. I think it's critical that we teach people how to think about innovation, how to constantly innovate. It's often said in a company that you can never relax. You've got to always be looking for the next curve in your innovation to get to survive and to stay ahead of your competition, and also how we respond to the challenges of innovation and how to do all of this with a moral and ethical compass. Secondly, for governments, it's a challenge because the government will never be as nimble as the private sector is. And so we in government have to figure out ways to partner with private sector companies and individuals to really stay on the cutting edge of technology and to, again, be ahead of the curve to a certain degree. And then finally, as was mentioned, how can we work with like-minded countries to foster collaboration in areas of innovation, exchanges among scientists, technologists, applied engineers, and others, and to create the conditions and the culture that there can be sort of a cross-fertilization of ideas of folks who may look at issues differently, but together and collectively can reach a better and more innovative outcome. So those are some big issues. I just wanted to throw out that framework and look forward to the discussion on them. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador. I'd like to come back in particular to your point on capital markets in a moment, because I think that's so important. But first, Esther, let's go to you on UPS, not just a mover of goods, but a real innovator. Tell us about it.
Thank you. Thank you, and thanks to Raisina Dialogue for inviting me and for being part of this distinguished panel. So I'm here because UPS is not only committed to India, but innovation is part of our DNA. On a daily basis, we are moving about 3% of the world's GDP. We've evolved from being just a package delivery company, but also a company that is involved in freight and logistics services around the world, operating in about 200 countries and territories. So what this does is it gives us a bird's eye view of what's happening, right? So trends and patterns on what suppliers and companies are actually doing, but also what consumers are looking for. Our company celebrated its 110th anniversary last year. So in order to survive 110 years, we have gone through lots of political, economic, and even environmental changes. And what we need to be able to survive that is to constantly evolve. We started off as a humble bicycle messenger company in Seattle, and then evolved into the Model T. With the introduction of the ocean shipping lines, we found ourselves getting into that space as well. Started an airline. Computers completely changed the way we operated. Our drivers used to go delivering packages with literally spreadsheets and spreadsheets of zip codes that they had to use. Computers changed that, so we saw the diode system, which has evolved over time, make it more efficient for our drivers to make deliveries. And today, we are looking at autonomous vehicles. We're looking at drone deliveries. We're using drones to do our cycle counts in the warehouses. We're exploring using robots in our warehouses to be able to move supplies, faster and more efficiently. And we have to do that. We have to do that if we want to be able to service our customers. We have to be able to do that if we want to service the consumers that are now so knowledgeable and have access to information at their hands and are expecting goods to be delivered to them instantly. But then that also gives us the competitive edge and making us move faster and more agile. Behind all that is the data that goes with it. And we're able to use that data that then we can go back and figure out how do you optimize what we're doing today? How do we optimize the movement of goods from China to Africa? How do we optimize, if you're looking at just a simple case of in the US, for instance, how do we optimize how our deliveries make those deliveries in a simple area like Atlanta, Georgia? You know, maximizing and increasing our efficiencies. So big data for us is a key area. But I'm not necessarily, I know you mentioned during your introduction, Patrick, that I'm big in innovation, but actually we do have a big team of folks that are involved in all that work, right? So doing all the analysis and coming up with the different technologies. And every year we're spending about $1 billion in technology. So we consider ourselves a logistics company, but a technology logistics company as well, because we have to do that. That's what our customers are expecting us to do. But in my role at EPS today, because I've been through several roles within the organization, in my role today, I'm responsible for our public affairs advocacy efforts in the region. And I bring that up to say that today you have a housewife sitting somewhere in the middle of Dubai who has started a business thanks to e-commerce and has changed her world. It has changed her family and has been able to change the economical, you know, outlook of the family as a whole. But thanks to e-commerce, we're grappling with e-commerce in the logistics space because of it's such a fast-changing pace, and it's been quite revolutionary for us, making us change how we operate everything. But then I bring up the advocacy area, because we still believe that there's a role for government in order for us to be able to do that. Last night during the Prime Minister's speech, he mentioned the necessity to have good governance and policies. So for us in public affairs, that's what we're doing. You know, we're working with governments to ensure that we not only are able to protect our customers, but also make sure that the environment is conducive for us to be able to deliver the services that our customers are looking for. Customs clearance, you know, we can create the best portals out there. We can invest as much as we want to in robotics and invest as much as we want to in technology, and have all the visibility tools that our customers are looking for. But once the goods come in to a border and cannot be able to cross, there's a bottleneck. We're not able to deliver the services that we need. So for us, working with governments and ensuring that they have modern customs clearance processes is key. That's one of the areas that we spend a lot of our time with, my counterparts around the world. And also being able to talk to governments about what we're seeing, what's working, what's not working out there. You know, how else can we be able to come in from a capacity building perspective? So not necessarily as criticizing what's happening, but more as a partner. I think the ambassador talked about collaboration. So for us, that's what we look at ourselves as, collaborating with the governments where we're working to make sure that we're able to deliver. And we believe by doing so, it's a win-win. You've got, you're enabling trade, you're enabling commerce, and the economy is growing.
So that's great. You talked about really two enabling factors, one technological innovation and the other good governance. And Saad, you know, I think in many ways, same factors apply to what you do, which is distribution of a different kind of thing, you know, distribution and creation of content, which ultimately is the vehicle for cultural expression. How does this work with your industry, and why, when we talk about this broad theme of geo-economics, should Minister Prabhu, Ambassador Joster, and their counterparts around the world really care about what you're doing?
Well, I think for us, technology's been very good. You know, we're storytellers, we're content producers, we develop IP basically. And we you know, sometimes do feel threatened by the likes of Facebook and Google because they take away digital advertising spend away from us. But ultimately, I think technology is going to help us. And I have to tell you the story about India, how we came into India. So 5 years ago, if I wanted to launch a channel in India, I would have required at least $100 million for content development, which for a company like ours was virtually impossible. The barriers were exceptionally high. So 3-4 years ago, we decided, we felt that maybe there's an opportunity to launch something on the digital, in the digital arena, to, as sort of an online content platform. And in those days, the numbers are pretty low. There were probably about 170 million people who had access to the internet. But we took a gamble. We felt that time was right. It was very expensive to download content using a mobile device. Most people use a mobile device, but through a Wi-Fi connection. But nonetheless, we took the plunge. We found someone exceptionally creative in Mumbai, very well known in India, who became our chief content development officer. So we created this content, and lo and behold, the environment shifted very quickly. So today we have 400 million people who have access to the internet. By the end of 2018, you'll have 500 million people who have access to the internet. Now, in India, there are only 500 million people who have access to a television set. So internet's already caught up. If you look at Facebook, for example, the biggest market for Facebook in the world is India, with 241 million odd people. And what's also significant is that the technology and telecommunications companies have stepped in. For example, the cost of internet dropped by 95% because a new player called Geo, owned by Reliance, stepped in, came into the market, took 40% of the smartphone market, allowing people like us to be able to better distribute our content. So looking at it now in terms of just commercial opportunities, the digital video advertising market's worth about 200 million. It'll be worth 2 billion in 3 years' time. So the growth is phenomenal, being helped by technology. So for a company like ours, which was traditionally a television company, we've become device agnostic. We distribute content now on television, even in India, on a mobile device, on anything that basically you can download content through, we can utilize. So for us, technology has been very good, and I think that trend will continue. And India, for us, is a very exciting market, and I think the government is doing what it can to help. For example, they've put a floor in terms of bandwidth speed so that the telcos don't really cheat their consumers. That, to us, is very helpful in opening up the market to the likes of Geo. So we're very excited to be in this arena, and for us, technology provides us with a significant opportunity.
Is there one particular policy point that you would point to say, if you can do this for us, it really helps us succeed in any given market?
Well, I mean, I think every country, we're in, 20-odd countries now. You have your challenges, whether it's moving money out to lack of competition in certain markets, like in Ethiopia, there's only one telco. There's only one game in town. So in the digital arena, we have limitations in terms of how quickly people can download content. But I think India's on the right track, and I think that the signs are very, very positive. And I think they should, and they have allowed private sector players to really do the heavy lifting in this country. And that's where I think you're going to see the bulk of, the big changes being led by the private sector.
Well, and that's right. I think, this forum seems to point to is when, free market democracies collaborate, real good things can happen, and India seems to be right on track with that. Kavita, you're in the blockchain investment space, and I think most of us probably, associate immediately blockchain with Bitcoin, but I think the reason for being of your fund is really to apply it across all sorts of different new applications. How does this apply here?
I was just hoping you're not going to talk about cryptocurrencies. First of all, I would really like to thank everybody to take time out on this panel. Especially, it's a pleasure to be here with Ambassador Chester and Minister Prabhu. I think before I even go into blockchain, and I want to lay something on the policy side, which is I very strongly believe that technology is the infrastructure for any policy to be actually achieved, the vision to be achieved in a real life on a very big scale basis. If we look at Prime Minister Modi ji's any programs, whether it's on the digital economy side to Aadhaar, to the demonetization, to a big agriculture movement on supply chain, the basis of all that thing are the technology. Now, how do we use that technology? How do we build that technology, which is not only in a very transparent and a secure manner, but actually empower people instead of empowering individual institutions or individual entities, is where I think, again, policy and the government becomes very important. I also feel that today, India is actually one of the leading governments across the world, which is taking a step forward in choosing the next generation technologies, which we call as Web 3.0, like blockchain. I'm very happily surprised that India is one of the countries which is taking such a big leapfrog in adopting blockchain technology at every part of its policies or different departments, whether it's an agricultural department exploring supply chain. As you said, blockchain is probably the answer of all the problems you just talked about on the bottleneck side, apart from policies. Or whether it's on the security or the data layer on the Aadhaar, which is one of the biggest identity platform done worldwide. Or on the question which we hear back in the country where I reside right now in US, fake news, is again having a verified data sources coming or going back and scale it, trace it back. I think government does a very big role, as we have seen the European government did with their new policies on Google and Facebook. So government does drive what should be the policy, what is right for the people, and how actually use and which technology to use to attain that result. But I do want to say that technology, which a lot of times becomes also under the hammer by the government, how the job profile is going to change, how the geo-economic and the skilled versus unskilled labor going to happen, is also defined by the technology play on the choose. But how government play in that, in moving a shift for the labor to move from one department to another department and have a very smooth transition, is a part which is not played by technology but back to the government. So going more into what I know more than the other policy stuff on the blockchain side, I think blockchain is what the next generation infrastructure layer, irrespective of what department, whether it's an infrastructure implementation on the supply chain, or it's going to be a data implementation on the security of the data, or on the media and the electronic media side, where is the verification of resources. Everything is going to be defined by more giving power to the people by having the transparency that people can see where the data is going or where are their orders in the supply chain processes happening. But all that is still driven by the policies by the government. They can still use such a powerful tool to have a private chain which is only for the government, or they can actually use a combination of public and private chain, giving a lot of power and taking the people in this technology revolution with their policies.
Any pitfalls that you see associated with the technology? I mean, you think of, I won't name names, but countries with more oppressive regimes, is there an application for this technology that's actually going to suppress people, or do we see it more as a real
How do we answer this question without naming a country?
It's a tough one, right? All right, we'll save that. Mr. Prabhu, I wanted to return to you on this broader theme of geo-economics, of innovation and creativity. And, Prime Minister Modi, I think, very notably said that a strong economy is the driver of an effective foreign policy. And I think we can, looking at the construction of this panel here, sort of extrapolate that innovation is critical to a strong economy. So how does India work with like-minded nations? Ambassador Justice here solicited the U.S., Israel, Japan, with whom Prime Minister Modi has had a very good relationship. How do you work together to make the whole more than the sum of the parts to make sure that India gains from the strengths that these other like-minded countries have.
No, absolutely. These are the reality, and which will really happen in the next few years' time, is the fact that innovation cannot be just confined to a geographical borders. For a simple reason is that, as it is already happening, that any technology developing any part of the world, by even after protecting IPRs, it is the interest of the developer also to diffuse it all over the world and try to get benefit out of it. So therefore, geographical boundaries cannot bound the technologies anymore. Now the question is of development of new technologies and innovation and how we should partner with them. So you mentioned some very interestingly 4 countries. And I think very interestingly, these are the 4 countries, and I'll tell you why it makes really a good sense. Of course, Israeli president is still in India. Yesterday, I chaired a session on innovation with Israeli companies, and we are really working with them. Now, 2 countries that you mentioned, Israel and Japan, has something in common. Israel, of course, has become now one of the next generation technologies are being developed in Israel. So they are really climbing the value chain in terms of developing new ideas and new technologies. But Israel, surrounded by sea, almost no water available to them, revolutionized the agriculture in that country. Without no water, they did that. Same with Japan, with virtually no resources of energy. They became the powerhouse of manufacturing. So this is very interesting. Somebody who had nothing, therefore they had to innovate and create something. The necessity, the mother of necessity is invention. So I think Japan and Israel have the same characteristic. Having nothing, they had to create something. US, on the other hand, is a completely classic example of having everything, but they could create a fantastic ecosystem for innovation. And as the ambassador pointed out, all the necessary building blocks necessary for innovation, they could do that starting with education system. So people keep asking me, how could US create Silicon Valley? I said, US didn't create Silicon Valley, it happened because they allowed the innovation to take place. Automatically the ecosystem got developed. They did not first create Silicon Valley, therefore innovation could happen. The innovation itself resulted into creation of Silicon Valley, and therefore ecosystem got developed. India is in between. So I saw 2 countries having nothing, US plenty of things. We have plenty of wants and not scarcity of resources. So the demand is huge because of population 1.3 billion people, almost 18% of global population, but not enough resources, but in a way some resources are very scarce. Like for example, land only 2.2%, water only 4%, the fresh water. So therefore, in India we need innovation of a different kind. And we can actually work together, drawing upon the US and India, we have such a close relationship. With Israel, we have a very good relationship. With Japan, we have good relationship. So therefore, I think 4 countries together can actually work together for innovation. If Israel develops a new technology, it is for few million people. So 1.3 billion people in India could actually use it better. See, Japan, again, realized it, one of the first countries to realize it, that they must create global scale manufacturing to succeed in manufacturing. So Japan became 2nd largest economy, of course now become 3rd, only because they realized that world is a market for their companies. And then they realized also earlier, probably one of the earliest to realize it, they started outsourcing manufacturing, and that's how the Asian tigers were born in Southeast Asia. So now we have a great opportunity in India that we can actually partner with the best proven technologists in the world, and we often offer them the market, we offer them the possibility of amortizing the cost of technology. And as I said earlier, see, the technology is going to have very limited life. You cannot say that now I develop technology, sit idle. That was the case maybe about 50 years ago. Now technology may not even last for a few years. It may be something which is possible because new generation will get born. I remember there was a very interesting cartoon which just came in the Le Monde in France, that one girl, which is the fashion capital of the world, is France. So one girl who bought the latest design costume, and she was running fast. So somebody said, why are you running so fast? He said, before it becomes redundant, I want to wear it. Because otherwise by the time I go home and then probably new fashion would have come in. So this is what is going to happen to technology. very soon you will see the technology is becoming. So India is having, luckily, best of relationship with all these three countries. We can work together, develop a common technology platform, and that is how it should be. Because I realize, as I said, innovation to creation. And that journey, innovation in Israel, but creation, to use it in marketplace, maybe India. US, of course, is a very classic case because they have already got a huge market, 320 million people, so big market as it is. But still, India and US coming together, becomes 4 times of their population is India. So we can work together and can actually make it happen. So I think it's a very interesting, exciting opportunity.
So that's interesting. You know, you think of connectivity and making innovation instantly available to many, many people, but I have got to believe that there's still an advantage, a key advantage of being first mover, disruptor in effect. So if you're, you know, someone else has an advantage and you're the disruptor, then, you know, you can change the terms on which you're competing in the global economy. And, you know, Ambassador Juster, you talked about capital markets, and we have with us a few panelists who have backgrounds in, you know, global investment. How important is it to have that legal regulatory infrastructure in place that recognizes a private property right to enable the transactions that have to take place between innovator and financer, innovator and product developer? You know, there seem to be so many steps that often get lost in that path between great idea and commercialization of a usable product. Do you see countries investing in that sort of legal infrastructure?
Well, you know, the key is, and this has been mentioned by some of the speakers today and also by Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday, is to have the minimal conditions to enable innovation, which I think includes a good free flow of capital, of data, and of ideas, in a sense, for the protection of them, but to really then step out of the way. You can't plan or structure innovation. You have to let innovation happen by giving people the incentives and the protections to go about it. And that's what I tried to refer to when I was speaking about what I thought were some of the key enablers in the United States, which were the certainty of intellectual property protection, the ability of capital to flow freely, and of people to get rewarded for their investments, and also the culture that encourages that type of activity. But then for countries to collaborate, and you mentioned some of this, Minister Prabhu, as well, there need to be open markets. There needs to be the ability to import and export. There needs to be the ability for data to flow across boundaries. There needs to be the ability for capital to flow without friction. That's the way great ideas can get stimulated and developed. So it's creating the minimal conditions, both domestically or if you want to collaborate internationally and with partners, and then sort of getting out of the way and letting the innovation take place and rewarding people, and having that built into a system where people then know how to apply innovation, but also, as I said, innovation is neutral, how to respond to what others may be doing that aren't always favorable. So it's a very fast-moving process, and I do think in the United States we have probably developed, whether accidentally or otherwise, a great environment for this, and to the degree we can work with other countries to help spread and stimulate that type of environment, I think that's a tremendous opportunity.
You ask if there are questions from the floor. I want to open it up. We have one over here on the left, or my left, your right. If you want to come up to the mic, and please just let us know your name and where you're from.
Hello, I'm Jana Dreyer, the founder and editor of Borderlegs. It's a news website on international trade policy. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, fascinating. I have a question for Minister Prabhu and a question for Ambassador Juster. Mr. Prabhu, it's very interesting to hear that India is thinking about its trade policy, rethinking a new trade policy, and it's putting digital at the heart of it. I was wondering, how is India considering, using traditional fora like the World Trade Organization for this? There was an e-commerce declaration in Buenos Aires that India did not join. Is this something that is being reconsidered, for example? What is the thinking on issues precisely like data flows and joining other free trade agreements where these issues are being tackled? There was the US-led TPP that is now going ahead without the US, but where these issues were already being tackled. Is this something that is being debated within government in India? That's my question. And a question to Kenneth Juster. Very interesting to hear you there. What strikes me is that the current Trump administration's focus is quite protectionist in trade, very focused on old industries, steel, do you think this is going to change? Is the US going to come back and push again for things like data flows in free trade agreements, revive TISA, where these issues were in there? Could you update us a little bit on what's going on that front? Thank you.
Either of you like to take a shot at that? Regarding our trade policy, and especially between the United States and India, what do you see happening going forward? And for Ambassador Juster, is the U.S. likely to re-engage in some of these broader trade discussions, and on what terms?
Trade policies are always one of the most difficult things in the world. So even with the best of friends, when you talk about trade talks, we always have very difficult times. I don't know how this word, who devised the word trade-offs. I think this must be the reason, because they probably were referring to commercial trade-offs. So there are always, trade-off means that we have to get something in return for to give something. So when you think about sit down with somebody and say, I want to give you something, what is that you will give me? So obvious, every country wants that I must get best and you must get a worst deal. But that is because everybody thinks like this, as I said about the same thing about import and export. So this becomes difficult. So I think what is important is we must therefore increase the size of cake. Because if you try to start cutting into already diminishing cake already, then it's not going to work. And therefore increasing global trade is something very important. Size of the trade should be important. How will grow size of trade? And there where the innovation comes in. If you can think about new ideas to be born, there is a new demand for those products. You talked about blockchain technologies. Maybe it is a new idea that will be really creating new demand. New products will be getting born. And then, of course, UPS will have better things too, because they can also link one market to another and make it happen. So point is, with US and India, we have got excellent relationship. I always say that trade deficit is a problem if there is a trust deficit. Trade deficit is a problem if there is a friendship deficit. But with US, we have very good friendship. We don't have a trust deficit. So maybe trade deficit can always be breached. We are looking at, in India, after unfortunate result of Buenos Aires, we are thinking of organizing a mini-ministerial in India, somewhere in the month of March, wherein we like to invite our friends in US and Africa, Latin America, all parts of the countries, at least 30, 40 of them. I'd like to find out how we actually create a new big trade volumes in the world. How do you make sure that trade will be able to flow from one into another? And that's what we are trying to do. So therefore, idea would be, rather than finding out ground of where there is a contention, where there is a reason for some issues, why not create bigger markets? Find out what can be done more, how can be expanding it, and then automatically we'll realize, because the size is increasing, we'll work together. But important point, and that I again highlight it again here, is that these are the days of partnership. This is no longer true that I will take everything, winner takes all. This is not going to be the new trade regime of the world. It will be that we work with a lot of partners. There will be value chains, there will be global supply chains, and if you become part of value chain and supply chain in global sense, you'll benefit from it, if not wholly, in a small part, but because you are benefiting from so many such value chains and so many such supply chains, the benefit of that will be huge. So that is what should be the new strategy for trade for all countries in the world. Now, to develop that, we must have one geopolitical relationship. Then only geo-economic relationship can develop. And therefore, geo-economics will also drive geopolitics in future. But that to happen, innovation will be the driving force, the trigger point. And therefore, I welcome these new ideas of working together, and that's what we are looking forward to. In the next 2 months, we'll invite some people. And if not Raisina Dialogue, it will be a trade dialogue with a Raisina spirit.
Ambassador, is there a new trade agreement in our future?
Well, let me make really 2 points. One is to really echo what the minister has stated, that trade should not be viewed as a zero-sum game, as one side wins and one side loses. We're all for opening markets as much as possible, which would increase trade, which would lead to increased investments abroad, which is going to lead to increased job creation. It's going to lead to increased building of infrastructure to make sure that there's distribution channels for trade, which will lead to greater economic connectivity. It all is about expanding the interactions across borders in a way that will benefit multiple countries involved in that. And so when I hear talk that the United States is protectionist, I say we really have to take a step back. The U.S. remains perhaps the world's most open economy, if not the most open, one of the most open. Our trade barriers are the lowest, tariffs and non-tariff barriers. What we don't want to see is that other countries aren't acting reciprocally and over time have not lowered their tariff and non-tariff barriers. And we would be delighted if that's what happens. We simply feel if over time that process has not taken place, and for a long time the United States was happy to stimulate other countries to lower barriers by having the lowest ourselves. But we expect over time for that to occur in a balanced way, and that's what we're trying to stimulate so that everyone can benefit. But at some point, the U.S. industry can't bear all the burdens by having low barriers but not being able to export our own products or invest overseas. But our view is that it should be an open system, which we think would stimulate greater innovation, greater ability for countries to partner, greater abilities for exchanges among technologists and applied engineers, and for innovation to take place in a way that's inclusive and sustainable. So that would be our view on it.
If there's a theme to this conversation, I think it's that government sets the conditions for success and the private sector has to be prepared to step in and drive it home. So I want to, we only have a few minutes left, close by getting some thoughts from our private sector panelists, first from Saad, and then to close, recognizing that I think we're entering, if we haven't firmly entered the age of the woman. I want to give the very last word to Kavita and Esther. But Saad, to you first.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think you have to create the environment conducive for people to develop or invest or to create. I think that's really important. I think one of the reasons why India is so attractive for us is that you have this huge pool of talent, whether it's in the creative industry in Mumbai or the technology sector in Bangalore or elsewhere. So it's a good place to be doing business in. And hopefully, I mean, one of the things, we've become a global company simply because we see opportunities. But in all the markets we do go in, there's a limited upside if the markets remain closed. So as much as we like to be the top TV station, media outlet, we know that we have only this much upside. So it's in our interest and everyone's interest for those markets to open up.
Thank you. And Kavita and Esther, I'm going to make it difficult to put you on the spot, but women in innovation, why is it going to be different this next era, and how are women going to impact innovation, and what's the advantage to the countries that move first to open up opportunities for women and equality for women?
Before I take a very specific question on women in innovation, I just want to say something on the trade side. I think coming from a private sector and have been investing in technology for the last 15 years, one of the gap which I always felt is like when politicians make policies and then use technology to actually achieve the results of those policies, there comes a limitation from the technology side, from the policy side, which the technology then has to cover, which takes down the efficiency of what policy or the vision can actually achieve. I think over time, what would be a very ideal situation would be whenever there is a vision or to create a policy, to take technology beforehand and have the technologist in the room to see what is the best way, especially when it's between 3 or 4 different countries, to actually achieve it. So going to the women age, which we, as a women, me and Esther are supposed to talk about how women in innovation are supposed to go. I would say there has been a huge conversation about how women are doing in innovation, but said that, we are still at the stage where we just started talking about it and we are right at the tip of the iceberg. So I'm very glad we are having this conversation in panel after panel, but I think it would take its own 1.5 hour of panel to even touch the iceberg.
That's a fair point, and I think, you know, sort of maybe reflective of the environment that we have lived in the past. Esther, we've shortchanged you and we're out of time. I hope that we have an opportunity to host you at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in the future. I'd love to have a more fulsome conversation on, especially on this last point. But we are out of time, and I want to thank Saad, Mr. Prabhu, Ambassador Juster, Esther, and Kavita. Really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your expertise, and to thank everybody who took the time to join us for lunch. Thank you all very much.